Edgar, how are you?
I'm good, man. Good to see you
Nice to see
during this
you.
crazy COVID times.
I'm Julio César Morales, curator at the ASU Art Museum. And tonight we are having a live recording with Edgar Arceneaux, who is being highlighted in our pilot programs project with his video until. And I wanted to share. I told Edgar that I was gonna have a surprise for him. I'm not sure how big of a surprise is, but I was trying to think how long I've known Edgar, informally, and all of a sudden, earlier this week, this artist and curator Trisha Lagasso from San Francisco sent me an image, and I opened it up, and this is what came up. So let me share my screen now and see if you can see this.
Oh my God.
This
Look
is
at us.
this is 2001. We're babies, and this
2001, yeah.
this is actually Worlds in Collision Symposia
Yeah, SFAI, man. Rest in
SFAI, San
peace.
Francisco Institute, that was the brainchild of Filipino artist Carlos Villa, scholar, educator, and
Yes.
this was co-organized by Unji Ju as well, who is now
Yeah,
the
yeah.
curator at SF MoMA. And so, if you look here, this is Edgar, and this is
Is that
Trisha.
Unji?
This is
Oh, who's
Marcelo. Do you remember Marcelo?
wait,
And
say
I
the
can't
name again?
remember.
It got a little digital. Say it
I
again.
can't remember who this woman is, but here's Paul Pfeiffer, and here's
Yes.
myself, and here's Jennifer
Yes.
Lawford and the Mail Order Brides. And so,
Yes. Yes. Dude, I was just on a Zoom call with one of the mail order brides. Oh God, what is her name? The one who was just bending over, kind of.
Rayanne, Rayanne,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It was so nice to see her again. Oh,
So
that's such a funny photo.
unfortunately, Carlos Villa passed away, and Trisha is the curator that is doing, actually the first exhibition retrospective of a American Filipino artist in the United States. And so that's set to
Uh,
open in San Francisco at the Asian Art Museum. And we'll
yeah,
see where it travels from there. But, he was my mentor, and he invited us to be part of the symposia. And so everything clicked
yeah, he was a
earlier
cool
this week.
dude,
I
man.
saw that, Edgar.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't know him that well, but I got to know him because you and Anji and so many people in that room that day had so much reverie for him. I could tell that he had touched many of you in a sort of a profound way and had been super supportive. So yeah, I'm sad to hear that he's passed, but you know, his legend still
Yeah,
lives on.
his artwork lives on, and really phenomenal work that he left behind. And he was just included also in the Signal Corps Biennial, so people are rediscovering Carlos's work, which is pretty cool.
Mm,
And so I'm glad that he's getting a lot of notoriety now.
mhm.
So maybe I wanted to maybe start with your project, the video that we're screening right now at ASU Art Museum.
Yep.
Maybe we can give audiences a little bit of background because the video was commissioned by Performa. And can you let audiences know what Performa is? And also, it is based on vaudeville in regards to honoring Bert there. Can you
Yeah.
both?
Yeah, I get just a little bit of backstory. So I met well, Performa was founded by Rosalie Goldberg, curator and performance scholar out of New York City, and I think, and I could be wrong, that I was in the maybe the 10-year anniversary of the biennial, and curator Adrian Edwards, whom she and I have now become friends, or become friends since then, had invited me to participate. And when I told her, I said, I have some background in directing, but I don't have any live performance experience. They were like, that's perfect. And part of performance mandate is to bring or expand the field of performance by bringing people to it that don't, that would not consider themselves to be performers or performance artists. So, or people who create performances. So yeah, so I jumped in to the process kind of reluctantly with both feet. I was excited by the idea, and since it was a commission, it meant that they were going to pay for it, and then the pressure was on for me to come up with a good idea.
And how did you come up with that good idea to start the conversation? The video, where
Yeah.
where did it start? You know?
Yeah. So until it's kind of like a 20-year journey, because I had been doing a lot of work around what I thought the performance was going to be about, which is essentially to try to take some of my installation work and some of my past directing work, and then to figure out how to spatialize that for a live performance interaction. And I thought that I was pretty close to an idea until like one fateful afternoon when I crashed a 5-year-old's birthday party, and who was sitting there at the bar was the actor Ben Vereen.
Wow.
So just seeing him sitting there, I was like, okay, it's LA, it's another celebrity. But as I was standing there in line to get some food, and I was looking at him, and then it dawned on me that I needed to go and talk to him, because about in 1997, a year, actually just a few months after graduating from Art Center College of Design, which is where I did my undergraduate studies. I was doing my research, watching a documentary on African American art. I left the room, and when I came back, that performance of Ben Vereen that he did at Ronald Reagan's inaugural gala in 1981 was on the screen. And I was like, okay, well, what is this? And I saw that it was a blackface performance, which was strange. And then the camera pulled back, it was surrounded by like 20,000 white Republicans. And then there was George Bush and Nancy, and not George Bush. There was Ronald Reagan, Nancy Reagan, the Bushes, and then there was a little text at the bottom. It said, Ronald Reagan's inaugural, and I was like, what is this? And then I didn't realize at the time, this is still back in 1997, that I was really fortunate, because I got to see the beginning of the performance and the ending. And it wasn't until I sat down with Ben in his living room that I learned about the impact that this performance had on his life. And I can speak a little bit more about the performance if you want, but essentially,
can you also
seeing it then and then running into him then.
Who Bert Williams was?
Yeah. So the performance that Ben did, and for those of you who don't know who Ben Vereen is, he was at the time in the 80s, he was one of the hot, commodities when it came to performance. He had won a Tony on Broadway for Pippin, for being in Bob Fosse's Pippin. He was in the television miniseries Roots, which in the 80s was like the TV show that everybody was talking about, the legacy of slavery through the lineage of the author Alex Haley, who was also at the time had become very popular because he wrote the autobiography of Malcolm X. So, and he's a singer, a dancer, and an actor. So he's like a triple threat. Right. And was highly celebrated. So when Ronald Reagan was elected as president, Ben being from California as well, and also an actor, he's aware of Ronald Reagan's legacy, both as an entertainer, but also as a conservative governor in California. His direct attacks against the Black Panthers. Basically him like, we want to get the hippies off the colleges. Let's just price them out. So like, college tuition kind of going through the roof, as part of Reagan's legacy. And what Ben wanted to do was something simple, which is to present the the legacy of Black performance in America,
Mhm.
both the highs and the lows, um, by doing an homage to the African American performer Bert Williams. So, Ben did the performance in 1981, but Bert Williams was kind of the Ben Vereen of his day, but even bigger. Like imagine Ben Vereen
In the
mixed with
late
Elvis, right?
1800s,
And the
right?
Beatles. Like, yeah. So in the late 1890s to the early 1900s through the 1920s. And I think he actually died in the 30s. Now,
Mm,
I'm a little bit fuzzy on those dates, but
yeah.
um, he um, was Black or white, one of the most popular singers, dancers, performers in all of America. Best-selling albums, was movies, he was doing theatrical productions. He was started his own production companies, did movies that didn't have Black actors in blackface, right? So like he really was, he kind of expanded the field.
Right.
And Ben Vereen did this performance, which existed in two acts,
Mm,
as an homage to this man. So the first act was a pretty true to form minstrel show, right? So, with the Bob Fosse twist, happy hands, blackface, white smiles. And then the second part, which contained the critique, ABC television actually edited that second part out. So you can imagine the impact on Ben's career at the time, which was, you know, you're a sellout, he got death threats.
mm.
His all the people that he admired, like Ozzie Davis, Sammy Davis Jr., Ruby Dee, Jesse Jackson, like all these people came out publicly against him, and he never really had the opportunity to tell his side of the story.
Right.
And let me put like a little asterisk on that point because I would like to come back to that a little bit later.
Okay.
Um, so Bert Williams was the man in the
Mhm.
1890s, 1920s, 1930s. And Ben Vereen was the man in the 80s.
In the 80s. And so you were there in his living room talking to him about the project. And so
Yeah.
when it came to sort of finalize your idea for a performa, was he willing to tell you the whole story? And I want to go into sort of like the research aspect that you did.
Hmm.
A lot of times when I curate shows and I work with artists, I'm really, really interested in their research aspect in their practice. Can you talk about the research you did for this project?
Sure. So yeah, so the research started with primary research. It was me sitting down with him, asking him what went on, and just like following him to different places, and you know, observing him, and asking him questions, interviewing. But in that living room, when he told me the story, it was really, um, something special kind of happened that is that kind of set off the whole event in my mind. But
Hmm.
I didn't exactly know how to tell it. So let me share my screen because I thought maybe
Sure.
it might
Yes,
be
I'd love to see
might
that.
be worth it for me just to illustrate it. So let's
And we're
let's
also going to
imagine
talk about the, it's just not a video. It was also a full
it is a
exhibition.
play. It's a play. It's an
Okay.
exhibition,
Yes.
and it's a movie. So what people will see at the museum is the installation version.
Hmm.
If they come and see the screening, they'll see the movie version,
Right.
and you know, and yeah. Um, so when I was sitting with Ben in his living room, he had a TV
Hmm.
that was like sitting on the floor.
Hmm.
And at a certain point, he said to me, "Well, Edgar, do you want to see the video?" So I was like, "Yeah, I would love to see it. It's been more than 20 years since I've seen it." So he sat down on the floor, you know, kind of cross-legged, and watched the video, and he was just kind of sitting there with his legs crossed,
Hmm.
watching from there, right? And then he was looking back at me, and I was sitting in a chair behind him, leaning forward while he was talking to me,
Mhm.
right? So I'm doing my best to pay attention to whatever it is that he, has to say. There's my little curly afro at the time. And what I had recognized in that moment of sitting there, watching him, watching himself. So, so this is, 1980, this is 1981,
Mhm.
where he's watching himself on TV. And then we're sitting here in the present. And at the time, I think it was 2014, 2015, right? But then the person who was on the TV, Bert Williams, that he was mimicking, well, let's say, the performance that he was mimicking was from 1901, right? So in my mind, as I'm watching this, I'm recognizing that there are these windows of time
Mhm.
that are aligning themselves for me, right? So one is of the archetypal past, and in the way in which I was experiencing it was in this kind of transient present, right? So as this
Mhm.
thing was moving across these time zones, I'm like, he's sitting here and he's 72 and he's watching himself when he's 30 something, right? Or
Right.
40 something. And then he's performing a guy from 1901. And it was at that point when these windows aligned
Mhm.
that I realized um, that I had this story to tell.
Right.
Um, but I didn't know what, but I just knew that it was going to be something that would show this continuity across almost 100 years
And
of time.
can you also talk about you told me this before when we were talking about screening the video of where you actually found the actual material that was edited out from that performance.
Yeah, I got it at Ronald Reagan's library because Ben himself didn't have the footage. And as a matter of fact, I just watched it recently because I showed it to him.
Hmm.
Because the performance that he showed me on the TV was actually one that he had done on TV before Ronald Reagan's inaugural. He had done it as an
Wow.
award show. So
Okay.
he figured when he did the performance at the gala that it was already vetted, you know what I mean? That it was fine and there
Right.
was nothing to be, skittish about. But I just want to add sort of one thing that I forgot to mention before was that Ben Vereen was actually in the play originally.
Oh.
He said that he would do it with me, and where I was writing it with under the premise that he was going to be in it, and it was going to be like, and with this version of him, which is going to be a younger version, he's going to be dancing with the older version, and it would be
Hmm.
this kind of gap that would be expressed through the kind of the dulling of this tool, his body as a dancer. Um, but he wound up dropping out after, life is so funny like this. He wound up dropping out after he reconnected with his manager from that performance that he did in 81, who wound up dropping him a few years later.
Okay.
They reconnected and then she forbid him from participating in this
What?
piece.
That's
Yeah,
crazy.
and actually tried to completely undermine my ability to perform it. So she was really, not a great partner in
Not happy with
in
that.
this
Yeah.
process. No,
Wow.
yeah. But what was the question that you asked me again? Um,
Well, the question was, his participation in a looser sense in the project itself. So it sounded like he was very much um, invested in the piece, and then he ended up dropping out. Have you
yeah, very abruptly. Say that again now.
so he was invested and then he dropped out. And
Yeah,
so I wanted to also ask you, you created the performance first, right? And you were talking earlier, well, we were talking earlier today about, breaking boundaries of what visual artists do.
yeah,
And we were talking about different artists that are engaged with theater or performance. Can you talk a little bit more about that in your, in your scope of work, but also with other artists?
right.
that are in this genre?
Right. So I would say like
We're talking about
fundamentally,
Rashid.
yeah, about Rashid Johnson, yeah. So I wasn't the first artist, like I said, I mean, this is mandate for them to invite artists that, who don't have background in performance. So, Rashid Johnson, who's a painter, and some of you may know him also as a filmmaker. Um, oh God, what was the name of the film that he did? Not A Raisin in the Sun. It was A Native Son, actually.
Yeah.
That was picked up by HBO. And I believe he's working on the script for another feature film right now, but one of his first directing, if not the first. And I can't say for certain about this, but I know it was one of his first live performances with Performa.
Mm.
And and other artists like Steve McQueen, for example, have
Right.
and even Cindy Sherman did a movie. I forget what the name of it is. I've heard that it's terrible. And of course, Julian Schnabel is another one who
Right.
might be considered a better filmmaker than he is a painter for some. So there wasn't a precedent for it, but I knew that I wanted to try it because it was something outside of my own expertise.
Mhm.
And I'm always trying to embrace this spirit of sort of embracing the spirit of a beginner.
Right.
Like the sort of the a kind of a quick workaround to innovation is just to work in domains in which you don't know the rules,
Hmm.
right? So either it's going to totally collapse or you're going to do something
Yeah.
that was unexpected.
I mean, I always think like I never want to be a master of something because I will miss the mistakes, and the mistakes have this spirit and this amazing way of working. And so that's one of the thoughts I always had is that we always need to continue breaking these boundaries and going outside of what you're taught in regards if you're a visual artist, if you're trained as a painter, but does that mean that you cannot make a film in that sense?
Well, I think it depends on the temperament of the artist, and
Mhm.
some people's temperament, demands that they work in different modes. I'm one of those. I'm one of those people. But I would say like even when I was in undergrad, and this is a challenge that an artist friend of mine gave to me, Vincent Johnson, and he said,
Mhm.
one of the most difficult things for you to do is to take what you've learned in one domain and take it to another. So like if you're a really good photographer, can you take those methods and approaches and apply it to drawing, or can you take it and direct it into sculpture?
Yeah,
And I yeah yeah I went a little bit deeper with that, which I said, okay, well, fundamentally, if I want to understand methods and approaches, like a scientist, then you have to test these ideas within different domains, right? So then you can get like an actual, it can go from being an idea to be some kind of fundamental truth,
yeah.
um, or that it expresses some truth.
As a curator, I'm always attempting to push artists to create new bodies of work, and that sometimes is not what they're known for. For example, when I was working with the artist Ana Teresa Fernandez, that's very well known for painting, I said, "I love your paintings, but can you make a video piece for the show?" And it was her first video piece that she created for this exhibition I curated.
Yeah,
And now she's gone hand in hand creating these beautiful paintings, but now creates these phenomenal videos as well. And so I think
yeah.
part of me as an artist curator is also kind of pushing those boundaries. And can we talk about, or can you show the actual exhibition from Suzanne Vermeer, where the
Sure.
project actually grew into an exhibition with sculpture and other elements and drawings as well. And one of the things that I always loved about your work, Edgar, is sort of your expanded looking at drawing as an expanded medium, as an installation,
Yeah,
seeing your work a
yeah.
very long time ago at the luggage store where you kind of exaggerated drawings. You know what I mean? The drawings weren't cut and framed and put neatly on the wall.
Yeah.
The drawings consumed the whole space, and they came from the
Mm-hmm.
walls into the floor. And
Mm-hmm.
I was always really excited how you are able to expand one medium into an experience. And so if you can talk about the installation and the exhibition for this project.
Yeah, that was drawings and removal at the luggage store. God, that was so long ago.
Yeah.
Daryl and Lori, I'm happy to know that
Yeah.
they're still going at it. Um, so let me talk about the installation and the film and
Sure.
the performance first from a which isn't very sexy, but it's since this is a school and these are students. Um, so um, from a logistical standpoint first, and then I'll talk about it from kind of an aesthetic one. Um, so having grown up in LA and seen a lot of movies being made, it's always surprising to me, like just how much waste there is. Like somebody builds a set, they build a bunch of props, and they all go in the trash afterwards. And I'd always liked encountering these spaces that when they were just being constructed, when the fiction wasn't fully formed, and then you were able to kind of project inside of them to imagine what sort of world in which they're building. Um, and then, as an artist who makes installations as well, then you start thinking to yourself, well, how is a prop different than a sculpture, right? So there's some fundamental differences, um, but for me, it was sort of was a challenge. So logistically speaking, to make the play into an installation basically meant that whatever the staging was for the play,
Mhm.
that could also go into a museum. So, um, and then that on its own could exist. So here's some images. So this is the installation. This is the performance. The
Mhm.
exact same stage. You can see the actors here. Um, and here's another example. The actors here behind the curtain. Here's him on the stage performing. But let me just skip through a few. So here's the stage itself. These are all of the elements. It's very minimal. And I know you were going to ask me a question about vaudeville, so I'll just
Sure.
I'll come back to it. Basically, to
Okay.
say that these are all of the elements of theater. There's a couple props, there's a couple costumes, there's a couple curtains, there's a few lights, and that's it, and the
Mhm.
floor. So when people would encounter the work as an installation, they could walk in and see the staging and see the performance itself being projected onto the curtain from the perspective of if you were in the audience itself. So logistically speaking,
Mhm.
um, because I'm an artist who most of my opportunities to show this work is in museums, then it made sense that I would design this in a way so that it could engage with two parts of the museum. One would be on the exhibition side, and then one would be on the programming side.
Right.
On the exhibition side, as you know, budgets sometimes are finite, but in the 21st century, programming is king, right? And programming typically has much larger budgets
Mhm.
um, than the exhibitions. So what this piece allows for me to do is to merge both of those pools of cash to be able to do the live performance or just the installation itself.
Mhm.
Because the live performance costs roughly about $60,000, which isn't a lot from a theater standpoint, but
Yeah.
for an exhibition, it's pricey.
Yeah.
But if you take those two things and merge them together, um, so here's a few images of it itself. Um, but when the live show goes on, which we did do in this room, then we bring in all of those props.
Mhm.
We bring in all the chairs, we bring in all the elements, and then it becomes a show that looks like this. And then when the performance is over, which is basically a span of a week, all the chairs, all the lights, all that stuff goes away, and then it goes back to being an installation again,
Uh,
pretty seamlessly.
right.
Um, and then the movie itself, which I've screened all over the world.
Mhm.
Um, that's a video file, and that travels. So that's it from a logistical standpoint.
Right.
Um, from an aesthetic standpoint, what I understood pretty early on was that um, as an experience, that it lent itself to being filmed, and it lent itself to being seen in person. And all I needed to do was to make the piece and design it in a way in which it could exist in those three states.
Right.
And I kind of thought of it as accordions, or like it can compress and be just one thing, or it can expand and be all three, or just two,
Mhm.
depending upon the context of the space.
Right. Can we also see some of the images, like the books and the hats and the actual artwork in the installation?
Sure. Yeah. Let me find that. So when you would encounter, which you can watch the film on both sides of the curtain, so you can sit on the stage on the floor and watch it on that side, which
Mhm.
has its own charm. But this is the main sculpture. This is the makeup table, which is a has a mirror on one side, and then there's a monitor on the other. So the monitor, the image on the monitor, is the one place that you get to see that original footage that of Ben's actual performance.
Right, from 81.
So that's playing on a loop here from '81, and then the book that's sitting on the table here is the book Nobody, which is one of Bert Williams' most famous albums,
Hmm.
and I believe the name of his autobiography. But that this is an object that I made.
Mhm.
And then there's the three outfits that he wears during the performance of the run of the show.
Right.
So this is how the piece is experienced as an installation. And then during the show, all of these things are active. So
Mhm.
in my mind, these sculptures all are like exist as a kind of kinetic potential, right? So they're actually meant to be performed in, and I want people when they see them that they see them as a verb and less as a noun, right?
Okay.
They see it as they understand it as an activity.
Right.
Um, so that was sort of my way of entering into these
Mhm.
as as sculptures.
And are you also continuing to, expand your practice into theater as well?
Oh yeah, man. Oh yeah, yeah. I'm working on a new piece right now
Can
that
you,
is
can you share?
initially inspired by Milli Vanilli. Yeah, it's called Bony Manilli. Um, and is looking at it's a kind of another one of these performances that's like the story behind the music,
Right.
because that there's a very interesting backstory to
And
that.
can you explain who Milli Vanilli was to people who are not
Yeah,
familiar?
so Milli Vanilli are these two brothers who one is German, the other one is French. They both met each other in Berlin during the party scene in the '90s, and they were both very beautiful. They didn't have the long braids when they first met, but they became infamous when they were outed for lip syncing their music, and this was right after they had just won a Grammy for like the best album.
Right.
Um,
Were
and
they
yeah,
from the Caribbean or African? I couldn't remember, like their background.
neither one of them is African, so
Okay.
they're both
But they're
born
explaining.
in European. Yeah, they're both black men who were born and raised. And actually, as a matter of fact, the one who died of a drug overdose, Rob,
Right.
um, he he had a white mother and a black father who was an American GI.
Hmm.
Um, and the other one who's still alive, Fab, um, was he's still performing today.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. But the backstory of them is pretty interesting. I'll try to summarize it because I know
Sure.
we're kind of turning a corner. But the guy who produced Milli Vanilli, his name is Frank Farian, who is a German music producer who actually started one of the most popular groups in the world that most Americans don't know about. It's called Boney M. So if you know Boney M's
Oh, yeah.
music,
Really?
um, yeah, he founded Boney M.
Hmm.
And it's a very little known fact that the lead singer of Boney M was this charismatic. He was born in Aruba. He was born in the Caribbean. This charismatic black man with this afro was actually lip syncing his
Yeah.
entire career, more than 30, 40 years. And he was actually this white guy, Frank Farian. It was his voice. It was a white guy singing, and this black guy lip synced.
Hmm.
And later, after he disbanded this disco group, Boney M, I think it was 5 years later, maybe more, he founded Milli Vanilli and then found his success in America.
Wow.
So he's a known lip singer. He's there's a number of bands that
I mean,
have lip synced the shit
they
out of
sold
music.
like 10 million albums. I mean, they were huge. And I think it was a performance, was it on Saturday Night Live, where basically the track skipped?
It was on an MTV like
Awards.
no, it was
No?
something where they would like sing. It was a concert that MTV was there,
Right.
and you know. But what was interesting about that is that Frank Farian walked away scot free, and
Right.
then these two guys wound up going down in infamy.
Mhm.
And what was cold blooded about it was that it was Frank Farian's idea for them to lip sync the music. And then he was the one who outed them to the public
What?
because they were trying to go their own, they were going to go solo
Oh, I see.
using their own voices
Right.
and sing their own songs.
Wow.
And when he found out they were going to do that, then he went to the press and then blew them up in front of the whole world.
I mean,
And then he disappears into the background.
and so like with connecting with Until, have you spoken to Rob, not Rob, sorry. Have you spoken to anyone
Fab,
from the group?
yeah. No, and I most likely I won't, because the story has evolved quite a bit since I did this. I have performed this play once in Lagos, Nigeria last year as part of
Wow.
a theater festival there.
Mhm.
But I'm in the process of rewriting it pretty dramatically, so they're still in the play, but they play a much smaller role than they did before.
Okay.
They're more like, they help me to tell the story I'm trying to tell now, as opposed to being about them.
Right.
But it'll be funny, and we've written like all our own music,
Mhm.
all our own sound, all our own scores. So yeah, it's a real production.
And maybe I guess in closing, we talked about this a little bit a while ago, but before the recording, but how are you keeping it together during these times, during COVID, during the uprisings, being an African American artist, Black Lives Matters, and how
Yeah,
what's happening with you in regards to
yeah,
together in your
yeah.
family?
Well, I mean, I'm fortunate because Patrice Cullors, who's one of the three founders of Black Lives Matters, was one of my grad students last year, over the last 2 years. So I got to know the movement of BLM from the inside.
Mm-hmm.
So it allowed me that experience, and then seeing all the marches and the protests after a lot of abject depression around the Trump administration, and COVID on top of it, and I mean, just the environmental issues. So like seeing people out in the street and protesting, and making some actual changes. Long term, we'll see, but in the short term, seeing communities all over the world, advocating for the value of Black life has given me so much hope and optimism
Mm-hmm.
about the future. But I mean, also my personal life is also going through a lot of changes as well, both at home, and it's been one of the most creative, and then also one of the most difficult times
Right.
of my life. 2020 has been a kind of a shit year, I
Yeah.
would say. But also, like, I'm having some real breakthroughs in the studio. So
Mm-hmm.
what can I say? Yeah.
Right. Maybe we can end in a different note, but I know that you are a big fan of whiskey. And so sometimes with our audience, we also try and go a little bit further than just the artist practice. And so can you recommend, if people really love to sip some whiskey or something, what would you recommend? What are you
Oh
drinking
yeah.
now?
Well, what I'm in love with right now is Glenmorangie. Scotch.
Okay. Mrange.
It's like Glenmore Orange,
Uh-huh.
and it's fantastic. So it's a Highland Scotch. I think it's a 12-year, and you know, a little kind of a sweet aftertaste. It's got a bit of honey in it. It's got a nice kind of warm glow to it.
Yeah.
And yeah, that one right now is really hitting the spot. But tonight I'm gonna be drinking some Knob Creek with my buddy, because that's what he's got. So, you know.
And the last question is, do you have any advice for, you know, emerging artists at ASU? We have one of the largest, you know, art programs in the United States. And so what would be your advice tonight and our current environment to them?
Oh, you know, you know, the one thing that comes into mind is like, you know, have faith in the process, you know, and
The process
of making.
Okay.
And know that, you know, when you're making art, that you actually are having a conversation with the thing that you're making, and that you are making it, and it is also talking to you.
Right.
And one of the most difficult things to do is to learn how to listen to what your art wants it to be. And I think that if you are able to do that, it allows you to become more grounded in every other kind of way, both personally, politically, you know, you know that you have a strong, you know, connection to the things that matter to you.
Great.
That would be my advice.
Thank you. And you know, to go back to my question of whiskey, it was actually more for me because during the last election, I bought a bottle of whiskey and a bottle of champagne, and I wasn't sure what I was going to be drinking. And my wife Jennifer went to sleep early, and so when she woke up, you know, the champagne was left unopened.
Yeah, the champagne was hot and sweating.
Yes.
And the whiskey bottle was turned on its side.
We'll see what happens. And I really want to thank you for sharing your amazing video project with us at the museum, and having people at ASU and our local communities look at the work and be engaged with the work. And so I'm hoping for the best for next Tuesday.
Me too. Yeah, please.
Screened in November 3rd.
November 3rd. Yeah, great. And I would say, you know, no matter what happens, the world still needs art. Feel reified.
Yes.
Feel optimism and knowing that the world needs vision.
Yeah.
And they need people who can produce pictures that can help us to see clearly and be able to see in new ways that empower us, provide nourishment. So y'all don't give up, no matter how this shit turns out on Thursday.
And I appreciate your attire tonight.
Yeah, man. I wanted you guys to see, you know, I got this when Obama was elected, you know, look at this. And I brought this, I pulled this out of the crates just to remind me.
Yeah, well, thank you for wearing that.
Change is possible.
You were delaying a little bit for our recording because you had to find the shirt, and I wasn't sure, like, okay, he's gonna wear a nice shirt or something. No, he's wearing the right shirt.
Now is the time, baby. Now is the time.
Thank you. I'm gonna stop recording now.
Thanks, bro.
We'll talk soon.
Okay, buddy. All right. Thank you, everyone.